And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, as always, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Great to have you along for the ride. If you have not done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. You can also follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And be sure to like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger, Media Personality. And on both the Facebook page and the YouTube, you can get all of our great videos and fast-growing content right in front of you. So great to be with you today on this Thursday, the 21st of May. We will have, in just a matter of moments here, Michael Hiltzik on the show of LA Times. He is a columnist there, Pulitzer Prize winner. Looking forward to debating with Hiltzik a little bit about reopening America, which, of course, I am a very strong advocate of. In addition, we will be joined today by Mark Mix, who is the head of the National Right to Work Committee. He's going to be joining us to talk a little bit about the attempt to bail out states at the national level because, supposedly, of coronavirus. Not a good idea. We'll talk with Mark about that. And then Keith Nobles will join us. He is author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale. Keith is a former contractor to the intelligence community, military intelligence, for about 15 years, including during the last decade of the Cold War. Always great to check in with Keith Nobles today. With him, we're going to talk about Iran sending oil to help Venezuela. What's the significance of that? What does that mean? We will talk with the former military intel contractor Keith Nobles today. So Michael Hiltzik, Mark Mix, and Keith Nobles all joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads live here today. Great to be with you. But first, I want to talk about one of the aspects of this shutdown that we've seen in our society. Last night, we saw shocking reports of a shooting at the Westgate Mall in Arizona. Looks like 3 people were injured. Doesn't appear that there were any deaths as of this moment. Thoughts and prayers to everyone. Prayers that they will make it through and persevere. during this very challenging time for anyone who was shot and anyone who is in their families and friends, anybody who was there. Traumatic, just going out into the mall, perhaps for the first time in months, and this is what happens. Truly a tragedy. Yesterday here in Aurora, Colorado, there was a shooting at a Waffle House. A man reportedly went in 3 different times and each time was turned away for not wearing a face mask. The 3rd time, he shot the front desk clerk at this restaurant because he was told to wear a mask. This morning, we saw a shooting with an officer injured at a naval base, Corpus Christi. These are tragedies, and it is heartbreaking to think that as people are starting to go about their lives a little bit more, trying to get back to normal perhaps, these things are taking place. These evil acts of heinous violence. Our hearts must all break right now and go out to the victims and their families. And may the fullest extent of the law be used to prosecute these vile excuses for human beings who would do this. Apparently the man in Westgate went live on Snapchat and snapped how he wanted to be Westgate shooter 2020 or something. That is vile and horrific. And none of this is something that should be happening in our society. Make no mistake about it. And by the way, I'm a reopening advocate. I'm not a believer that people should be forced to wear masks, even though I think it's a good idea in many cases to do so. But any business has the right to turn away customers. And if you will not abide by their decisions in order to enter their restaurant, you should be turned away. That is their right. And they ought to have that right, as it's their property. Now, the law may require it, and you may not like that the law is requiring it, but law or not, if a business tells you you cannot come in here without a mask, you should listen to that. Wear a mask or go to some other restaurant or place that will allow you to go in without a mask. Not hard. Just do it. But here's the thing. Right now, there are already calls for more gun control. People saying, oh, we shouldn't have left gun stores open during the pandemic, even though millions of Americans were understandably concerned because we've seen it bear out in Michigan and throughout the country. We're very concerned about their rights being trampled upon and felt very insecure and wanted to be able to exercise their right to defend themselves, especially if, say, there was some sort of civil unrest and there was a break-in in your home. That's why we argued on this program that people should be able to exercise their constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms and purchase firearms and ammunition at stores. But this isn't about gun control. What we're seeing right now is a plain-as-day demonstration that our society has not handled mental health well. And here's how I know that what we're seeing right now all across the country in terms of these shootings, but in other areas, is demonstrating mental health issues is because after 2 to 3 months, and in many parts of the country longer, of people being cooped up in their homes, not able to go out and about, not able to live their lives, go to work, living in fear about how they're going to put dinner on their kids' tables. What are they going to do? Living in that kind of terror day in and day out, being cooped up in isolation in many cases, or single parents with 2 or 3 kids that they're having to take care of. And they are not able to or are discouraged from seeking medical attention for a variety of things, including mental health issues. In our society, we have been woefully inept at taking into account the need to address mental health and take it seriously and help people in that regard and get rid of the stigma and so forth surrounding mental health and mental health treatment of issues. As a society, we need to get past that. But here, on this program, we have argued for weeks that these shutdowns were narrowly tailored simply towards addressing the virus, understood, containing the spread, but to the exclusion of a hell of a lot of other healthcare issues, including mental health. I was talking with a woman last night who messaged me after I posted something about this. And she was telling me she's a single mother, had to be separated from her child for 2 weeks in total isolation. And at the end, ended up having an issue that led her to getting a mental health hold. Because she was in isolation for 2 weeks, serious isolation, and the mental health toll that that sort of thing can have on somebody is tremendous. I can only imagine. I've been fortunate enough to be able to go out and about and come here into this studio and do the job because I've been considered essential. The idea that this is going to be a gun control effort doesn't sit right with me. Because right now in this country, we have a mental health crisis. And we must address the mental health crisis. And we must not be telling people you have to be cooped up in your homes and we don't care about the mental health issues. If you have a biopsy scheduled in February, good chance you don't have it rescheduled yet if you are in certain states. We had a gentleman, Rick Jackson, owner of a healthcare company, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And he was telling me about a woman in February, and this was 3-4 weeks ago we had Rick on, about a woman who had a biopsy scheduled in February, and it hadn't been rescheduled yet. And she was very concerned about if she's going to be able to catch possible cancer in time. I've dealt with mental health issues myself, family members who've had. I've lost extended family members to suicide. And I think that one of the things as a society we have to grow to understand and accept is that we cannot have a stigma surrounding mental health issues. People need to get care, need to get assistance, and need to be encouraged to seek it out. And months of isolation, being cooped up like this, can do tremendous damage psychologically for people. It is one of many reasons we need to reopen. Now, let me be clear. Mental health anguish from being in isolation is utterly no excuse for evil, heinous, vile acts of violence that should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But oftentimes mental health is the reasoning behind, or the fundamental issue behind a lot of these incidents that happen. And we have to recognize that, and we have to take appropriate action, and we have to do what we can as a society. And we have to recognize that there are many negative effects of this narrow-banded shutdown. All we do is quarantine people for 3 months, and that's going to somehow address the virus. I'm unpersuaded that that is the reason why we have gone beyond just flattening the curve. But we also have to recognize that even if that was the case, and that was a driving force behind where we've seen some of the progress in this country on reducing the spread of the virus, that doesn't mean that we should never have taken into account all these massive effects, not just economics. It's not about what Sherrod Brown of Ohio said, 0.5% of GDP, how many lives will have to be lost? The pompous attitude of that guy in Washington, D.C., saying how many lives will be lost for 0.5%. It's not about GDP. It's about people being able to live their lives. And not just economically and paying for their bills and whatnot, but beyond that, addressing even healthcare issues, hospitals, not getting nearly even close to the number of people coming in, particularly because they've been discouraged and fearful and also told don't come in unless you have something very, very serious or it's COVID-19 and you have all these processes perhaps for COVID-19 in order to get in and so forth. I think we need to understand the full scope of what's going on in our society with these quarantines. We need to pay attention to that and make sure that we're accounting for not just one aspect of public health, the virus, but also mental health. We're not going to go to a video break because I went longer in this segment, and we have Michael Hiltzik on the line. Here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, I always like to have spirited discussions with folks with whom we disagree. Michael Hiltzik is a columnist at the LA Times and a Pulitzer Prize winner. As always, one of my favorite guys to spar with, and he joins us now once again here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Michael, sir, good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning to you.
Good to have you. So were you able to hear my...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you just fine. So how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Everybody in my household, including the dogs, is healthy. We're functioning pretty well.
That's what you can ask for sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit here. You seem to be, well, tell me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've been reading some of your columns. What is the full scope of your overall view of the reopening of America right now, Michael Hiltzik?
Well, I think it's proper to reopen to some extent because we've learned a lot about the nature of this contagion, the nature of this pandemic. So we know what's relatively safe and we know what's unsafe. These are things we didn't know at the outset. And as I've written, the real reason that we needed a very thorough lockdown, we didn't know and we were making no efforts to find out. It's a shame of this country and of this government that we failed the test of keeping the population, keeping the public health strong, which is having adequate testing and adequate analysis. We still don't have that. And we're how many months into this? That's a failing of government. And frankly, it's a failing of the federal government because we knew from the outset that individuals could not handle this sort of cost or the comprehensive testing that we needed. So that's that. But as I said, we've learned, we know what's safe, we know what other measures are wise to take when people are out and about. We still need to have social distancing. We should all be wearing masks when we are out. This is not a political statement. It's not a partisan issue. It's basic public health, and it's basic care for your fellow residents. You may have had a negative virus test this morning or yesterday. You still don't know. First of all, you don't know if the test is accurate, and you don't know that you haven't gotten infected since that test was taken. And since we know that this virus is infectious even before anybody knows that they've got it, it's important that we all take these measures just for the sake of our friends and fellows and people that we meet and pass on the street.
Well, and
sure, some reopening is reasonable, but we do not know enough in really almost any state about what the real risks are.
So talk to me about when you say some reopening is reasonable. What do you mean by some?
Well, I think it's reasonable to have to open outdoor recreational activities, especially if they can be done with people keeping a reasonable distance. In some states, going to the beach under some circumstances is fine. I think it's. I think we know that the level of infectious and the risk of catching the virus is greater when you are indoors, and when you're indoors in a given place for a longer period of time, and in close quarters. And that means that, a restaurant meal is riskier than a run outside in a park. So we need to take all these things into consideration, and then I think we can relax some of the rules. But we didn't know this at the outset, and we didn't make any effort, as I said, to find out, and that's why we're still in this fix.
Well, when you say to find out, what exactly do you mean? Like, how would we find out?
Look, the countries that had most success in suppressing contagion are the countries that went right in at the very beginning with thorough testing, so that they would know, first of all, they would know who had the virus, and they would know who was at risk, and they would know where the hotspots were and what the nature of those hotspots were. We are still not doing that. It's unbelievable that we're not doing that yet. This is, I keep hearing that this is the richest and most technologically advanced country in the world. The fact that we're not doing it is, as I said, it's shameful.
Michael Hiltzik, again, our guest from the LA Times. When it comes to the testing, I mean, I think one of the problems is that in the beginning, you did have one test that the FDA had put out, or whether the CDC had put out, one test that was approved. It was woefully defective, and it took some time to get the regulations dealt with in order to allow for more tests to go about. So I think we got off to a more difficult start in terms of testing from the beginning, particularly because of a failure of government when it comes to that regulatory regime. As for coming up in the succeeding weeks, I think things have gotten remarkably better given the fact that here in this country, we have, 350 million people. It is a massive undertaking, and we have had millions of tests in the United States of America and millions more coming about. And so, while I think that it is important to increase that, and I agree with you that we haven't done a good enough job in that regard, I don't think that the idea that government can somehow stimulate the increase in the testing adequately, or that we should be waiting months, potentially more, in order for tests to be ramped up to the way that they should be, is appropriate, is right, and I just don't have trust in government to handle that in the first place. So I'm not surprised by a failure in that regard.
I think you're dead wrong on that on a number of counts. First of all, we have the technology, and we always have, to roll out these tests. The CDC rolled out a bad test. The WHO had a good test. The CDC, or federal government, refused it. States and labs had good tests. Federal government refused to let them use it. Other countries, including Canada, had tests ready. South Korea had tests ready. Taiwan had tests ready. This was not rocket science. We knew even going into this pandemic that tests would be the number one task. The fact that we didn't do it, that's on the government. The reason it didn't do it isn't because it didn't know how, or the technology wasn't available. It did know how, and the technology was available, but it chose to sit on its butt instead of rolling it out.
In the beginning, the problem was the CDC had one test.
We have not improved. We're not where we need to be.
Well, we may not be where we should be, but we are absolutely better than where we were for sure. And when it comes to that early part of the test, though, there was only one test that the CDC allowed, Michael. So if the CDC initially offers one test and only allows one test, and it's a defective test, I wholeheartedly agree with you that that is a failure of government not meeting the challenge in the beginning. For sure, in terms of your point about ramping up and not being ready, it's because the CDC only allowed one test to go out there, and that was a defective test. But let's go to the reopening question here, because in my view, I think we're at a point where, yes, we do have a lot more understanding and knowledge about this virus, certain things that we should be doing as far as precautions. How are we not at a point where we can trust the majority of people? Yes, there are going to be some people who will not follow those regulations or suggestions and what have you. That's always going to happen in a free society. People will sometimes take undue risks that they shouldn't. But how come we cannot start trusting now the people of this country and do a wider scale reopening with social distancing measures in place instead of a piecemeal, let's just do this group and this type of business and this and that, and slow the ability for people to get back to life?
Well, all right. Let me take those points, and I'm not sure it's in the same order that you stated them. We can trust most people. We can trust most people, and we do trust most people. And when I go out on the street, I see almost everybody wearing a mask. But the fact that, whatever percent, 5% of people are not wearing masks and are arrogant about it, that's not simply a 5% risk. That's a major risk because they can infect a lot more people. That's the whole point of public health, is that you want everybody to be healthy, not just for themselves, but for yourself. Because an unhealthy person, or a person who takes risks that he or she says, well, I'm just risking myself, that's wrong, and it's stupid, and it's moronic. They're not just risking themselves, they're risking everybody else. So we still need to have rules in place and social practices in place that protect everybody and protect them from the idiots out there who think that it's, that they're making a political statement, or they're standing up to freedom. It's freedom to harm everybody else. And I'm fully in sympathy with businesses that say, if you're not wearing a mask, you're not getting in the door. If you're not wearing a mask, we're not letting you check out your merchandise, and we're throwing out of these premises because you are risking the other shoppers, you are risking the employees who we've spent a lot of money to protect.
Yeah.
And you're just being an idiot, and
I made that point
and
before.
I would use a word that I don't want to use on your show, but we know what these people are.
Let me agree with you right there for a moment, Michael Hiltzik, which is, I'm not a believer that government should require the masks, but I think that if any business tells a customer you're not allowed in here, whether by law or by their own choice, they have that right as a business, and they ought to have that right. And clearly it's a good precaution for business owners to say, we're making this sort of restriction. And I said that in my opening monologue at the top. I said, look, if you go into business, don't throw a fit at the business owner or just the worker who's telling you, I'm sorry, you can't come in here, because whether by law or by our own choice, we're not letting customers in without a mask. I mean, I think it's asinine to be just a jerk that way and mistreat people when they're just doing what they think they need to do or should do.
Let me make another point here, which I think is important when you talk about reopening, because this is a point I've written about a few times now. The government can't dictate reopening. I mean, it can, in certain contexts, and for businesses that don't care much about their employees. The only entities that can dictate reopening are patrons and customers. And if I'm into a business establishment and I see a lot of people not wearing masks, I leave. I'm not going to do business there because I'm taking my life in my hands. And that's, I think, what's happening. If you look at the figures on restaurant reservations and restaurant orders in the states that have gone whole hog for reopening, you are not seeing 100% of that business coming back. In fact, you're in every state, you're barely seeing 20% of that business coming back. And one of the reasons is that the average consumer isn't convinced that government or business has made it safe enough to go back to the old ways. So the fact is that rules like, you have to wear a mask, rules like you have to keep your distance, that's good for business, because without it, customers aren't going to walk in the door. I mean, sensible customers are going to walk in the door. And if a business just wants to serve the idiots who they're taking a stand by not wearing a mask, those businesses are going to go out of business because that's a small proportion of the customer base.
But that actually, I think that underscores the justification for reopening, because I think most businesses, even without a law in place, will say, we need you for the time being to come in with a mask, to keep social distancing. You'll still have stores doing that sort of thing. When you go to Walmart or Target, they're going to have the distance markers and so forth. And I think they're going to take those precautions. And over time, people will feel more comfortable getting out there. But if we have restrictions where you're saying, no, you can't go to these types of places, or you're going to be arrested if you go to a gym in New Jersey, because even though you're wearing a mask and so forth, let people and businesses make those decisions. And I think, going to your point, that they're going to be smart about it. But I want to play a clip here in cut 4, because we're starting to get low on time, Michael Hiltzik. This is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida yesterday talking about the tremendous success that they've had in his state at addressing this virus without some of the steps taken by your state of California or New York State.
Our data is available. Our data is transparent. In fact, Dr. Birx has talked multiple times about how Florida has the absolute best data. So any insinuation otherwise is just typical partisan narrative trying to be spun. And part of the reason is that because you got a lot of people in your profession who waxed poetically for weeks and weeks about how Florida was going to be just like New York. Wait 2 weeks, Florida's going to be next. Just like Italy, wait 2 weeks. Well, hell, we're 8 weeks away from that, and it hasn't happened. Not only do we have a lower death rate, well, we have way lower deaths generally, we have a lower death rate than the Acela Corridor, D.C., everyone up there. We have a lower death rate than the Midwest, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. But even in our region, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida has the lower death rate. And I was the #1 landing spot from tens of thousands of people leaving the #1 hot zone in the world to come to my state. So we've succeeded, and I think that people just don't want to recognize it because it challenges their narrative, it challenges their assumption, so they got to try to find a boogeyman. Maybe it's that there are black helicopters circling the Department of Health. If you believe that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you.
Last question.
Now I have to say, I really was impressed by Ron DeSantis' remarks there, as you can imagine.
All right,
I
let
would
me
be.
respond to that.
But I do want to compare that to New York, where talking about a failure of government. You had a major play on the part of Governor Cuomo to keep people or put people into nursing homes where 20% of their deaths, of the 24,000 deaths in New York, ended up happening in nursing homes. And here in Colorado, where I am, 57%, where we've had stay-at-home order, 57% of those deaths ended up being in nursing homes. Go on.
All right. Let me just say, I'm also impressed by Governor DeSantis. I'm impressed that he's a moron and a liar. All right. Now, here he is. He's standing there, bragging about the state of Florida. He's shouting. He's not wearing a mask. He's about 1.5 feet from the Vice President of the United States, who's also acting idiotically. If DeSantis happens to be, and we don't know that he is or isn't, happens to be infected, he's now just infected the vice president, and he's put the reporters who he was yelling at great risk. He's an idiot. The fact is, not only does he not know what the level of infection is in his own state, but he fired the statistician who was in charge of trying to put those numbers together. So don't tell me that DeSantis knows anything.
Very thorough explanations about the firing of that
figures
individual.
from Florida are not reliable. And not only that, but the reopening, what we do know is that the level of infection lags reopenings by several weeks. So the consequences of his half-assed policies aren't going to be known until sometime in June. And then maybe he'll be able to brag, but I sort of doubt it. He's an idiot, he's a liar, and if you're impressed by that, then that's just sad.
Well, you know what, Michael? I think, first of all, when it comes to the firing of that statistician, as you said, he explained that, and I wish I had the clip, but I didn't pull that yesterday
he lied
very
about
thoroughly. I
Oh,
disagree
yeah.
with you that he's a liar. I don't think that what he's presented at all is remotely untruthful. I think it's exactly accurate.
Well, his statistics
but
are
let
a
me
lie,
ask
so
you,
that makes him a liar.
I have to run here, but I want to ask you one more question, because our next guest, we're going to be talking about the idea of bailing out states that have been dealing with the financial strain of this coronavirus. You have people like my next guest who argue we should not do that. What is your take on state bailouts, real quickly, Michael Hiltzik?
Well, if you want to pump up the unemployment rate even higher than it is, then don't bail out the states, because they're going to end up firing police officers and firemen and teachers and professors. So yeah, if you want more people to be out of work, then sure, then cop an attitude about states, not deserving any money. Let me just remind you once again that the #1 state in taking money from the federal government and needing money from the federal government is Mitch McConnell's state, and that's Kentucky. It's #1 as a ward of the federal government in this whole country. So when he boasts about how he's not going to help blues, the fact of the matter is the state that he's going to hurt the most is his red state.
One final question, actually, for you, because I see it looks like we both have gotten haircuts. I remember last time you were wearing a hat and everything.
I have not got that.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. Well,
No.
unfortunately, I was wondering because it looked a little like you'd gotten it trimmed since then. Okay, well, I got a haircut, and I got a haircut just a few days after the possibility came open. And I wanted to say this, that when I went there, they said, you have to wear a mask. They took my temperature as well, all well and good. I got in there, did the thing with the haircut, and she had the mask on, and we were talking. And I asked the stylist, I said, do you feel comfortable being here? She was relieved to be back to work, but do you feel comfortable? And she said, I think the precautions we're taking are exactly right. We're making sure that everything is absolutely clean. And we are wearing masks. We're doing all of these different steps that are necessary to make me feel comfortable, that I'm also ensuring that my customers are feeling comfortable. What do you make of that, Michael Hiltzik? Is it time okay for salons to be back open? Or would you say that I shouldn't have been able to legally get a haircut?
Well, look, it's up to you. It's really not up to the stylist to decide, who's comfortable. But the fact is that, hair cutting, hairstyling is a close quarter activity. So yeah, I think you're going to have to be I'm certainly going to have to be much more comfortable than I am at the moment going to get my haircut.
And I think comfort is what should be the determining factor, not government, in whether or not you get your haircut. Michael Hiltzik.
Well, you can be comfortable and you can be wrong.
That's true. Fair enough. But hey, I think that I would trust an individual to potentially be wrong more than the government impacting millions more to be wrong. But Michael Hiltzik, always great to spar with you, my friend.
Individuals don't do anything.
I understand. Always great to spar with you, my friend. Thanks for joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
All right. Good luck.
Michael Hiltzik, everybody, for the Los Angeles Times, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We are well overdue for a break. When we come back, we will be joined by Mark Mix, who is the head of the National Right to Work Committee, and we're going to talk with him about what exactly is going on with the state bailouts and get his take, which is, I tell you, it's different from Michael Hiltzik. You must do it, otherwise bail out the states, unless or otherwise you will see unemployment skyrocket even more. So keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain and the ship's doctor are attending a medical convention.
And that's how gigawatts can be used to cure chronic incontinence. Thank you. And now I'd like to send everybody back to the buffet line.
Nice speech there, Doc.
Yes, nice speech.
Ooh, it's time for the keynote speaker.
So, which doctor is speaking first?
Doctor who?
The doctor speaking first.
Who?
The guy on first?
Who?
What's the name of the doctor speaking first?
Who's on first?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, tune in next time when we hear Third Base on Starship Winkler.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I have an issue that's very important right now to the American people and to the people of the United States as well. Our jobs are disappearing to Mexico. I'm going to change that in 2021 when I'm reelected. These jobs are gone. Even the Keebler Cookie Company is no longer, it's in Mexico, folks. It's down in Mexico so far. And those elves are out of a job. Our elves are out of, they don't even speak Spanish. They can't go down there, and they have Mexican elves down there now who don't even understand English making these cookies. I'm going to read the new ingredients just so you're interested. Honey, check. Wheat, check. Oats, check. Sugar, of course. But here's where it gets strange. Chicharrones. What's chicharrones? Jalapeno peppers, folks. If you try these cookies, you're going to burn your tongue off. It'll be gone. You'll have nothing. You won't be able to speak Spanish or English or any other language. Well, I'm going to bring those elves back so quick and so much. They're going to love it. You're going to have your cookies back, and your tongue's going to be fine, believe me. Trump 2020, thank you very much.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to your host of the Crossroads, Mr. Sang Style himself, Jimmy Sengenberger. Ladies and gentlemen.
Rockin' and rolling back, Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us for engaging, intelligent talk, Sang Style. I just always have so much fun arguing with Michael Hiltzik. He's one of my favorite guests on the left to spar with from the LA Times. Always interesting. You never know exactly how the conversation is going to go, but that was fun. Welcome back to the show. Once again, we're on Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner, where we cover a range of topics. And at the end of my conversation in the last segment with Michael Hiltzik, LA Times columnist, he made the argument that if we don't bail out states across the country, well, we will see a lot more unemployment. Is that the case? Should we begin bailing out New York and California and Illinois and other states that have overextended themselves and now are really facing it because of the coronavirus crisis? To talk about that, we're joined by Mark Mix, who is the chairman of the committee, the National Right to Work Committee. Mark Mix joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Mark, sir, welcome to the program.
Jimmy, good to be on with you, and I'm thinking to take that offer up on the Nick. Don't get nicked by Nick or whatever. That I shave a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's abundantly clear to me. But scruffyman.com, is a great place to go. So let me ask you this question, Mark. In the last segment, I was debating Michael Hiltzik about reopening in general, and I wanted to get in a question so we could get a view that differs from you and me, arguing in favor of bailing out the states. The National Right to Work Committee argues not. He said unemployment will go up if you don't, because you will have firefighters and policemen and healthcare workers out of work. What say you?
Well, look, they're looking for literally trillions of dollars to bail out the states that you mentioned, Jimmy: California, New York, Illinois, Connecticut, New Jersey. And somehow they're trying to frame this in the context of the COVID-19 emergency or crisis, whatever we're calling it. And frankly, that's just not true. This is literally decades of mismanagement by these states. And particularly, it's decades of mismanagement when it comes to their government employees and how they basically run their government. In those states have been dealing with unionized government bureaucracies for literally decades. And that negotiation between politicians, who the unions on one hand contribute to get elected, and the politicians on the other hand that negotiate contracts with these same union officials, have caused this huge deficit in these states, and specifically the pension programs in these states that are basically bankrupt. I think New Jersey's like $130 billion short of what they need just to satisfy the promises they've made to retirees and current employees in that state. In California, the numbers are even bigger. In Illinois, we know they're on the brink of bankruptcy. So the notion that they come to Washington during this crisis, and they're taking Rahm Emanuel's advice, never let a good crisis go to waste, and trying to get the taxpayers from states that have been managed better, who have been more reasonable and conservative in their expenditures and dealing with their bureaucracies and their employees, and then yet they come and say, we're going to have to lay off teachers, so it's going to upset the children, because it's all about the children, Jimmy. You know that. And then first responders. When frankly, if you look at California, they have 345,000 government employees that make over $100,000 a year. Those aren't all the police and firefighters, I can assure you that. So this idea of a bailout, because we have this emergency, is something that I think is kind of whistling past the graveyard for a lot of these governors in these big states.
Yeah, to me it seems like they were woefully unprepared for any sort of the coming due, if you will, of what's been happening for years and years, where it was fiscal mismanagement in all these states that you're mentioning, and they had no incentive to address it until, I mean, in fact, this is what happens frequently for governments, is that until the crisis hits, they don't feel like they need to make any smart decisions. And now that the crisis is hitting, and they want states like Colorado, for example, where I am, to bail out Illinois and New York.
Yeah, and your governor seems to be coming at this in a reasonable manner. I mean, frankly, of all the governors across the country, he's actually trying, I think, to get things reopened. And I think as a business person, he understands that those people that provide the oil that fills up the government oil jar every year through tax revenue, they're hurting just as bad as anybody else in this. And the fact is, and we know that state after state, and probably as we get into June, we'll see this, government revenues are going to be hit in a very big way. So there will be an emergency, but the idea that we had a bill, that they passed a bill last week that actually was a $3 trillion bill, of which $1 trillion was designated to go out to the states to bail them out. And then you had provisions like in Title VI of the bill that said any education money that would be doled out to the states would come with the requirement that they couldn't change any provisions in their union bargaining agreements. I mean, and then general provisions of the bill said in Title X that every contractor, subcontractor, and general contractor that does any work with federal money through this program has to pay union wages. Those are the types of things they slip into these bills that should make taxpayers' heads spin around and around and around.
When we look at the decision-making process of finances, by the way, relative to other Democratic governors, I give Governor Polis credit. But beyond that, I mean, that's a low bar to reach in my view. Beyond that, he's done a heck of a lot of things, like taking $1.6 billion in federal funds. A month ago, he said this legislature will determine how to spend it. He's allocating the money himself now. But that aside, when we look at a state like Colorado, one of the wonderful things here is that we're unique in having the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which puts strict limits on government spending increases and on tax increases. You have to come to a vote of the people for tax increases, although they get around that by putting in new fees. But nevertheless, it provides greater restriction. And I wonder if a provision like Tabor might have helped some of these other states from getting into the level of a crisis and depth of a financial crisis that they seem to be in now, because it would have provided an incentive earlier on to address some of these issues, at least a little better.
Yeah, I think that's right, Jimmy. I mean, I remember back when Colorado led the way on Tabor and other states tried to do it, and I think union officials and politicians and government bureaucrats stood up and said, oh my gosh, could they really, if this goes through, we could be limited in how big we can grow and how much money we can collect. So yeah, there was definitely a pushback to that. I do remember those days. I forget how long ago that was, but certainly the idea of limiting government growth would be something that would have helped prepare these states for what's going on right now. No question about that.
What is your view, Mark Mix, again, president of the National Right to Work Committee? What is your view on bankruptcy, allowing states and cities to declare bankruptcy as an alternative to bailouts?
Yeah, well, certainly we know that cities, I mean, we had cities in California, I think 4 cities that filed bankruptcy there. There's a city in Alabama that's filed bankruptcy now. I think cities and localities, I think that way is clear. There remains a question about the pensions, and I think in California, one of the things, they separated the pensions from the government expenditures in these at the local level, and there was, for example, in Illinois, you have a constitutional provision that says you can't do anything to reform the pension system, which is outrageous. As far as a state filing bankruptcy, I mean, if it's a reorganization, that's one thing, but if it's this, we got to bail the whole state out, that's another problem. This notion that somehow the states are reliant on the federal government. When we started this whole experiment in self-government, Jimmy, we started out with the federal government being a ward of the states. And obviously, over the 200-plus years we've been going through this process, and the federal bureaucracy and government's grown bigger and bigger, we've got to a point where the balance has shifted now, that the states are coming. Literally, you've got a legislator in New Jersey saying, we're going to be on our knees begging the federal government to bail us out. You've got legislators in Illinois, the Senate Majority Leader there, Don Harmon, indicating that he wants $41.9 billion of federal money. They want $15 billion with no strings attached. His words, not mine. These are the types of things that I don't think we should be rewarding and bailing out a state that's been irresponsible like Illinois. And it really gets to their pension issue specifically, Jimmy. They made these promises at the bargaining table that they knew they couldn't keep. It's kind of like John Maynard Keynes, we're all dead in the long run, so whatever we do in the short run doesn't matter. Right. Well, it matters now when revenues are dropping like a rock, and these pension obligations out there for workers who went to work, did their jobs, and said, here's what your pension's going to be, those people are the ones that are going to be hurt the most, both in the private sector and certainly in the public sector. So from a state filing bankruptcy, I'm not sure how that would work and who would be responsible for putting them back on a financial footing that would allow them to operate again. I'm not sure I have a view on that or would support the federal government bailing out a state in that regard. But allowing them to file bankruptcy to reorganize, that might be something that take a deeper look at.
So the other day, I had a recommendation that came up on YouTube for a documentary from, I think it was the early 80s, that had an interview with Donald Trump, who of course was decades away from becoming president of the United States. And it was about New York City having been on the verge of going bankrupt in the 1970s. And then Mayor Ed Koch was in this documentary, and he said, look, we had to make decisions because we were on the brink, and we finally made those decisions, took the actions that we needed to take, and it put New York City on a better financial footing. And I felt that resonated with today because there was a particular threat that gave them the need, suddenly the sense of urgency, we've got to do something. They weren't going to get a bailout from the federal government. Instead, they had the prospect of maybe declaring bankruptcy. That's the kind of thing, that kind of urgency that politicians need. Otherwise, you have what's called a moral hazard, Mark Mix, where they feel every reason to just keep making the same mistakes and going down this path because they're going to be bailed out by somebody along the way. In fact, that's something we saw with the financial crisis, is we had a lot of these, of 2008, a lot of these subprime mortgage loans were given out to borrowers who shouldn't have gotten them, and it was particularly because they felt and knew that the government, federal government, was going to be bailing them out.
Yeah, exactly right. Those banks, it was a moral hazard in bailing out because these banks were too big to fail, and the alleged destruction they would have caused if they would have been allowed to fail would have been too much for the financial system to handle. But on the state side, you're absolutely right. I think the New York model is a pretty interesting one. New York City, back in the 70s, was governments have to make decisions. And, the definition of government in our system is this idea that they provide services that no one else can provide. They're a monopoly. Unfortunately, over the years, we've granted this monopoly a monopoly that union officials tend to orchestrate. And again, the cost of government, just those two examples I cited in the so-called HEROES Act that was passed in the House that probably is going nowhere in the Senate. But the fact that they would put those provisions saying you can't change any provision in the union contract means that you can't reform the system. And then they talk about, well, it's about the children, and it's about the police officers and the firefighters. They lead with that. But if they just did let's say they just do the police function, they do the firefighting function, and they do the court system, those are the essential elements of government. Everything else, my gosh, they're involved in everything. And you're right. Forcing them to make hard decisions about how they run their governments is really, I think, the ultimate solution to this. And that comes when taxpayers understand the implications of what's happened. And I think they're going to get to see it in states like California and New York in Illinois, in Connecticut, in New Jersey, particularly those states that are in the most difficult financial positions at this time. We had a governor in Kentucky that tried to reform the pension system down there and did things that were really hard decisions. And politically, he paid a price for that, allegedly, in the last election. But the idea that he was trying to reform it and the pushback on just doing simple things that would make the pension system sustainable for maybe 10 or 15 additional years became such a political hot button that, most governors and elected officials, as you know, Jimmy, they don't want to deal with anything other than, the official congratulations to the state AAA champion or the official insect of the month or the official flower or cookie of the state. Those are easy things. When it comes to hard decisions like you talk about and looking at what they're doing and the services they're providing and the cost, they're loath to do that until they're actually at the edge, like Governor Koch or Mayor Koch said.
It's such an important point. And that's really the nature of politicians altogether, which is one of the reasons that I'm a big advocate of limited government. A final question for you on this topic, then I want to ask you about the current state of affairs for right to work in America. Is there anything else that you think people need to know fundamentally about this issue of bailing out the states that maybe isn't getting out there well enough when you do see someone who says no to bailing out the states out there making the case not to? Anything missing?
Yeah, I think it's this notion that somehow this crisis has caused this problem. I think letting people understand that this is not something that happened overnight. It didn't happen because of a virus that came from China. It came from decades of mismanagement. And really the only way to change that is through the political process. And the more informed folks are about what's happened to government and what the bill is, for 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road, notwithstanding anything to do with the coronavirus or COVID-19, nothing to do with that, just what the natural progression was going forward for these governments of the decisions they were making. That's kind of the important thing in separating the two events. I mean, if they really want to do something to help in the coronavirus situation, that's a different topic than this notion of, as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. They've got a crisis developed, and now they're trying to paper over decades of mismanagement to get taxpayers to bail them out from states that were fiscally responsible. I think that's the important thing. And you'll hear the sad stories about, oh yeah, we're going to lay people off. Well, unfortunately, in the private sector, that happens all the time when markets change and demand changes. So
yeah, exactly. It goes to moral hazard and the idea where if you privatize gains but socialize losses in the private sector, for example, that is to say, a company benefits when they make profits and so forth, and they get to keep that. But when there's a crisis and then we bail them out, that's essentially socializing the losses. And in essence, that's what you'd be doing here for these states, and then saying, anytime you need a bailout, in essence, you can just count on the federal government. Not a good thing. But since you've twice mentioned Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste, let's hear him say it.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
So he says serious crisis, but he said good
serious,
crisis too.
Sorry,
but,
Jimmy.
No. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's serious. That was 2008. I think during the 90s he was saying good crisis. Hillary said that. I mean, it's the main refrain from Rahm Emanuel, but we hear many people, and that's an important point, that they always look to a crisis and find it as an opportunity to grow the size and scope of government with new expansive programs or spending initiatives.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a final question, and that would be national right to work, since you are the president of the National Right to Work Committee. Just sum up for those who aren't familiar with the concept of the right to work, what that is, and give us a quick synopsis of the state of affairs as far as states that are making sure that this is a priority in law.
Yeah, Jimmy, it's real simple. The right to work principle is we believe every worker should have the right to join a union, to choose to financially support a union if they want to, but no one in America should be compelled to join or pay dues to a private organization, i.e. a labor union, as a condition of keeping a job. Today, 27 states protect workers from being forced to pay dues or fees to a union just as a job condition. We passed 5 new right-to-work laws in the last 8 years. We won a U.S. Supreme Court case in 2018 that frees every government employee across the country, from the lowest level to the highest level of government, from being forced to pay fees to work for their government. So the progress is good. The state of the right to work movement is good. We've got lots more work to do, obviously. Union officials don't take this laying down. In fact, we just settled a case today on behalf of 263 employees in the emergency service business in Michigan who were being forced to pay dues, even though the state has a right to work law, forced to join the union. So we litigate for employees across the nation. We help to legislate in states to pass new right to work laws. And over the last decade, it's been a good time for freedom in the workplace, but there's obviously plenty of work to do. And the stakes couldn't be higher come November, because we have a presumptive nominee in Joe Biden who said he wants to repeal every right to work law in the country. And the House representative passed a bill in February that said they were going to repeal every right to work law in the country, forcing every American worker under a regime where they could possibly be forced to pay dues to a union to get or keep a job.
Yeah, in essence, the right to work is the way to prevent people from being forced to do something or to be involved in an organization that they don't want to. How many states have right to work laws currently?
27 states now, Jimmy.
More than half. That's not bad, but not where we need to go. All right, Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee. Great to check in with you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good to be on with you.
Once again, Mark Mix joining us, National Right to Work Committee. Very interesting point of discussion, not just about the bailouts and whether or not we should bail out states, but also the whole issue of right to work and the importance of making sure that individuals are not forced, especially in government, but also in the private sector, are not forced to join a union organization that oftentimes, by the way, is doing things politically that they don't want to do and participate in. In just a few moments, we will be joined by none other than a friend of the show, Keith Nobles, who is the author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale. He's a former intelligence contractor to the military intelligence community. We're going to talk to him about what's happening with Iran and Venezuela, and then also a little bit about the WHO and China as we continue here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Concerned about that trade deficit? Looking for that magic solution? I'm Bill of Goods for ScamWow, the tariff towel. It's like a tax. It's like a fee. It's like a penalty. This tariff really sucks up the trade deficit. And the jobs we'll save are tremendous. This is for the House, the Senate, the POTUS. You'll be saying crap every time you use the ScamWow tariff towel. Look at this. It just does the work. Why wouldn't you want to pay twice the price for that washing machine? How much would you pay for this tariff? It'll make this microwave seem like it's brand new. And at only twice the price. Look at the way the tariff towel cleans your clock. Wow, look at that. So clean, you can see the future. You can see future tariffs coming from a mile away. Look at the way it polishes these stars. Boy, if that don't make you feel patriotic, huh?
I love paying extra. I don't even worry about it anymore, since the trade deficit will go down.
Look at this tariff. I love this tariff. It's like a security blanket.
All I can say is, scam, wow!
ScamWow compels other nations to use their own tariff towels on our stuff, making our goods more expensive overseas. Whoopee.
The micro tariff is for everything, for lumber, for steel, even solar panels. It'll melt that trade deficit down. I don't know. It sells itself, America. The ScamWow sells for 25%. But if you call in the next 20 minutes, because we can't do this all term, we'll give you the second tariff absolutely free. That's 4 tariffs for 25%. And it comes with a 5-year warranty. Here's how to order.
Call 1-800-RIP-YOU-OFF. ScamWow is not available in capitalism and is made in Washington. Beware of ScamWow grift. 1-800-RIP-YOU-OFF. Call now.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Certainly we want to be safe. We want our fellow citizens to be safe. But there is never a time to short-skirt the Bill of Rights.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Hi, Jimmy. This is Bill Clinton calling your secret hotline here. I gotta keep it down because I'm calling from the doghouse here in Chappaqua, New York at our place. Don't even ask. All you need to know is she's on the warpath again. Oh boy. Hillary yelled at me for listening to you. I have to do it in secret. But I really admire your show. I really do. I'm calling to wish you the best. All the best. In the future and even right now. Oh, here she comes. Listen, I gotta go, but you got a great show, and you're gonna do very well in the future. I'll tell you that much. Oh my God, I know it's gonna happen. She's gonna have me read chapters of her book again, put us both to sleep. I know what the title of her darn book should have been. Should have been called "How I Dropped the Ball on the 2-Yard Line with 3 seconds left in the Super Bowl." I gotta go.
All right, Crossroad fans, let's welcome back to the set Scruffy Man himself. Actually, correction, folks. Jimmy Sengenberger, my bad.
I don't know about being Scruffy Man himself, but I do love our friends at Scruffyman, scruffyman.com. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire, working the Matouche magic once again today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, your source for engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, day in and day out. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. By the way, tomorrow, Free to Choose Friday is going to be all about free speech. We're going to have two leftist professors on to debate speech and speakers on campus. That's going to be interesting. Two leftists debating that. And podcaster extraordinaire Dave Rubin joins us live as well. We'll talk about his book on speech and censorship. Don't burn that book. And related topics as we zero in on the freedom to speak your mind on Free to Choose Friday tomorrow, exclusively here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So we're covering a range of topics today, and I saw a headline yesterday, Wall Street Journal, U.S. seeks ways to halt Iran's oil sales to Venezuela. And Keith Nobles was a guy I just had to ask on about this because he's got a military intelligence background as a military intel contractor for about 15 years, including during the last decade of the Cold War. He's author of the novel, Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale. And he also understands, as his T-shirt shows, that socialism sucks, and Venezuela is a prime example of it. Let's welcome Keith Nobles back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, this time on camera. Keith, my friend, welcome back.
Hey, Jimmy, how are you?
You know, I'm doing well. I dig the socialism sucks T-shirt. Are you sure that it sucks? It's not a good thing, because I hear it's all the rage these days.
You know, if socialism doesn't suck, nothing does. I mean, this whole story, the whole story here with Venezuela buying oil from Iran. If you think about this for a moment, look back at 20 years of history. So let's start with the facts. Venezuela is generally recognized to have the largest known oil reserves in the world. They have more oil than anyone else has, and they're buying oil from Iran. So if you look back at this over the last 20 years ago, Chavez took over in Venezuela. Chavez, basically the model was, we're going to implement socialism. I want to have the profits of our oil industry pay for this. We're going to take the money, the profits of the oil industry, we're going to redistribute that back to the people, and it will be wonderful. And of course, that never happens. For all the countless reasons socialism always fails, that did not happen. And it started not happening pretty quickly. And pretty soon what you see is Chavez taking over car factories, taking over tire factories, taking over the entire economy, trying to bleed profits out of these companies to fund his social programs, and it's never, ever enough money. And of course, as the government takes over, nationalizes these factories and these industries, the profits just disappear because bureaucrats have no idea how to run a car factory or an oil refinery or any of this, and the profits just dissipate. And now there's no money going to pay for these social programs, and these people are in ever more poverty because they no longer have jobs in the car factory or in the oil fields, and those things are not producing a profit. And so there's no money going to the social programs, and everybody's now much poorer than they were. But nothing probably can illustrate this as much as Venezuela, the country with the world's largest oil reserves, having to buy oil from Iran on what is essentially the black market.
Yeah, it's stunning to think about that. We saw yesterday news reporting that there's a Russian oil company that's decided not to do any more business in Venezuela as it had been, which is pretty significant. They're trying to avoid U.S. sanctions. Tell us about that, because that helps to underscore that, okay, so Venezuela, because of the outright socialism that they've been moving towards over the past 2 decades and are there, that has decimated their own oil industry. Venezuela, one of the prime sources of oil for many years on the global stage, to the point where now, not only were they relying on Russia, now Russia's cut off the spigot to do business with them, but they're at that point now where they're trying to get Iran to be able to get oil into the country. Otherwise, they won't have any, perhaps.
Yeah, no, exactly. Rosneft is the Russian company that bailed last week. And actually, back in March, they said they were going to quit working directly in the Venezuelan oil business. And basically what they said last week is they're just going to leave Venezuela entirely. But yes, it's to escape sanctions. It's interesting because ostensibly one of Trump's more successful foreign policy endeavors here has been getting Russia out of Venezuela. So if you recall last year, Russia had announced they were going to build a military base in Venezuela. That did not go over well in D.C. with the Pentagon, with the State Department, with the CIA,
Or
etc.
with James Monroe, may he rest in peace.
Exactly.
The Monroe Doctrine,
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And Russia at one point flew several of their bombers to Venezuela and landed them in a Venezuelan airport, made a big show out of that they were going to have military presence. And now not only does Russia, they did not build that military base, but yeah, it appears Russia's just pulling out of Venezuela entirely in order to escape the sanctions. These companies don't want American sanctions against them that damage their ability to make a profit, damage their ability to do business elsewhere.
And so, Keith Nobles, obviously this is catching U.S. interest of Iran selling oil to Venezuela and trying to get it transported there, particularly because of all the sanctions and embargoes on Iran and the decree you should not buy Iranian oil and so forth. What are the tools at the American government's disposal to stop, or at least attempt to stop, the flow of oil from Iran to Venezuela? Because clearly, for example, it would need to cross the ocean.
Yeah, well, theoretically, at least, we could seize those ships. Now, that's probably unlikely to happen, but that's at least a possibility to have happen. I don't think we want to go to the point where we effectively are blockading Venezuela, because that's probably a step too far.
Why?
But, because it's really an act of war, and we don't want to be at war with Venezuela. What we want is Venezuela to change their government. We want Venezuela to return to a government that is market-focused, that has some semblance of democracy and consent of the governed, and we want Venezuela to have friendly relations with their neighbors in the United States. That's really what the United States wants. And none of those things currently exist in Venezuela, not to mention there are people eating out of garbage trucks because of the catastrophic economic conditions due to socialism. But that's really what it wants. But can the United States do something here? Potentially we could. Would we do something? Probably not.
But what could be done, because they're looking at new sanctions, other sorts of legal steps without getting to a blockade or some sort of incursion on the open seas? Sure.
They can put more sanctions on Venezuela. At this point, you have to wonder, well, how much more damage can it do? Considering that they're buying oil from Iran. And of course, dealing with Iran is a whole other issue. Right? I mean, Iranian oil exports have gone to probably pretty close to zero here as of late. Last numbers I saw, which were for April, I believe, officially according to Iran, they were 13% unemployment and 46% inflation. Iran is economically hurting very badly, and that is primarily due to sanctions. And those numbers were what it would have been even before the collapse in oil prices. So now it's from Iranian's point of view, it's even worse, because what little oil they may be able to export, they are probably not getting very much money for compared to what it was, say, 8 or 10 weeks ago.
Keith Nobles, again, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So in terms of the Iranian sphere of influence on the global stage, I mean, this has been an interest of the Trump administration very much. They've shifted fundamentally. We've talked about it on the program before, for example, with former Ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, and then also Fahad Nazer, the spokesperson for the Saudi embassy in D.C. He's been on the show. And in our conversations there, we've talked about some of the change dynamics as far as the U.S. and fostering stronger relations with the Arab world, particularly in order to combat Iran as a common enemy. How does that regional dynamic in the Middle East, and then also the fact that we've seen China and Russia be more closely aligned and defensive of Iran, maybe fit into all of this? I mean, it seems that as much as we're concerned about Venezuela, there might even be more concern about Iran and its relationship with Venezuela and getting oil and benefiting from getting oil to Venezuela, as opposed to Venezuela itself, that Iran's even more of a concern.
I would agree. Iran is much more of a concern than Venezuela. Venezuela is not a concern at all, other than its relative proximity to the United States. Strategically speaking, Iran is much more of a concern than Venezuela is, or
Why
will
is
be.
that?
Well, Iran's trying to develop nuclear weapons. We just start there. They're trying to develop missiles to deliver those weapons. They consistently threaten and even attack United States naval assets. I mean, that list goes on and on and on. Iran has, for 40 years, engaged in, funded, trained terrorists who have operated around the world, killing innocent people. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. Every trouble spot in the Middle East and East Africa that you can name, the people causing that trouble are being funded, trained, and led in some manner by Iran. I mean, it's what Iran does. Yeah. Iran has a particular ideological and theological blend that they believe entitles them to a place in the world that other countries do not agree with, and places them at odds with just within the region, with the Sunni, with Christians, with Jews. They are a mortal threat to all those people because that particular theological, ideological blend does not allow tolerance for those other points of view to coexist with them.
Sure. Again, Keith Nobles is a former intelligence contractor, the military intel community, for about 15 years, including during the last decade of the Cold War, and I appreciate your insights on that. I do want to ask you about the World Health Organization in China. There's a back and forth, it seems, in the decision-making process of the Trump administration on how exactly they're going to handle this. It appears that the WHO may get basically 10% in money funding from the United States of what they've been getting, because that's about to what equal to what they were getting from China. And the idea is that China had too much influence on the WHO, leading, for example, to them, the WHO carrying China's water in January and spreading misinformation about the coronavirus and its potential impact. So the question is, how do you see that issue of the WHO panning out? And particularly from your perspective as a military intel guy, on the national security implications for America of this decision?
Well, that's a really good question. So I think the Trump policy right now is kind of incoherent. I understood that Trump declining to further fund the World Health Organization, that made a certain amount of sense. I'm not aware of what they're trying to accomplish by now saying they'll fund it at the same level that China did. So the World Health Organization used to have a very exquisite reputation. They used to be considered probably the premier global organization that was actually effective at something. And the last 6 months, I think that reputation of being competent has been utterly destroyed. You're right. They utterly failed in China. The nicest thing you could say is they utterly and completely failed in China. The worst thing you could say is that they were in bed with the communist government of China and did their bidding to the detriment of the rest of the universe. Either way, what should happen to the World Health Organization now? It's probably not going to just go away. It's the weight it carries is undoubtedly greatly reduced because of what's happened the last 6 months. I mean, there's a big question.
What does it tell you, though, Keith Nobles, that China seems to have co-opted in one fashion or another the World Health Organization, an arm of the United Nations that was originally created to help stop the spread of infectious diseases across borders?
Well, we have talked before, at various times I've been on your programs, about China's ability to do this, to co-opt other organizations, other countries, the means they do that, be that other countries acquiring territory via debt traps, things like this. If you've noticed, there have been a rash here the last 10 or 12 weeks of arrests in the United States of American academics illegally selling their research to China and people being arrested and charged for that. That's a big deal. So the idea that if you can buy off American academics to sell quite illegally, provide China their research, the idea is you can buy somebody at the United Nations or World Health Organization off. That's pretty obvious. And obviously, this is what China is doing. They're bribing people. They're buying people. That's a horrible thing. And traditionally, there are ways to deal with that that are kind of drastic. But I suspect the United States will end up taking some pretty drastic measures here because it's just unacceptable.
Just a final question for you, Keith Nobles, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I want to read a couple of headlines that are right up your alley. Now, and I say this knowing that, or with you knowing, as many in the audience do, that I've been a very strong critic of President Trump's trade policy. But there are a couple of headlines from op-eds in the Wall Street Journal in the past couple of weeks. One, May 7th. A Cold War with China would be a mistake. Another, 3 days ago, the U.S. doesn't need a new Cold War. One thing that you have been arguing on my programs and in your own writings and podcasting and so forth, Keith Nobles, has been that we've been in a Cold War with China since the mid-1990s. Why do you say that?
Absolutely.
Why are people suddenly saying it would be a new Cold War that suddenly comes about right now?
Because they haven't been paying attention for a long time. China started a Cold War with us 25 years ago. We, coming out of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we're kind of trite about it. We didn't consider it to be serious. And in fact, it's only been shortly after 2000, some people started taking it serious and writing about it. But it's only really been the last half a dozen years that people said, well, wait a minute, selling technology to China, maybe that wasn't such a good idea if they're applying that technology to ballistic missiles. Giving China access to this and that, maybe that wasn't a good idea if China's applying this and that to how to sink American ships or discover American submarines or any number of other things along those lines. But the Cold War has been there for a long time. We've just been slow to notice it. And it's really been, just since Trump got elected, that whole idea has really come to the forefront. And it should have come to the forefront many years ago. As a country, we were just too busy with other things, and we were not taking it all that serious. I think there's a sense of urgency now to take that seriously, and that's probably a very good thing. And I imagine we're going to view the entire relationship with China very differently after this, economically, militarily, diplomatically, financially. I think this virus probably is probably kind of the capstone on the change in relationship with China.
Good points. Keith Nobles, always insightful, former military intel contractor. Check out his novel, Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale, which is all about how socialism sucks. Keith Nobles, my friend, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, Keith Nobles joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And indeed, that is it for us today. Time has just flown right on by as per usual. But never fear, we will be back tomorrow with a special free-to-choose Friday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, featuring special guest Dave Rubin. And he's got a new book out called Don't Burn That Book. We're going to be focusing in on free speech and have a debate with two leftist professors squaring mano a mano on the issue of free speech on campus. We've got that and more coming up tomorrow. Don't miss it. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also to the Washington Examiner YouTube channel. Check out their website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Ours at JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com. Thanks indeed to our partners at the Examiner. Have a great day. Stay healthy. Be back tomorrow. And may God bless America.